But first, the Trump White House has seen a lot of turnover in its first 18 months, but one top administration official has managed to hang on.
Our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
The book is best understood as a work of very poorly written fiction. And I also will say that the author is a garbage author of a garbage book.
Aren't you trying to change what it means to be an immigrant coming into this country? If you're telling them you have to speak English, can't people learn how to speak English when they get here?
Well, first of all, right now, it's a requirement that to be naturalized, you have to speak English. So the notion that speaking English wouldn't be a part of our immigration systems would be actually very ahistorical. Secondly, I don't want to get off into a whole thing about history here, but the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. It's a symbol of American liberty lighting the world. The poem that you're referring to was added later.
While it may feel like we haven't seen Stephen Miller in a while, he is still a senior policy advisor and speechwriter in the Trump administration. Miller was with the president when he went to Nashville earlier this week. And as McKay Coppins writes in The Atlantic, he may still have his White House job because of his role as the president's, quote, right-hand troll.
Our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
The book is best understood as a work of very poorly written fiction. And I also will say that the author is a garbage author of a garbage book.
Aren't you trying to change what it means to be an immigrant coming into this country? If you're telling them you have to speak English, can't people learn how to speak English when they get here?
Well, first of all, right now, it's a requirement that to be naturalized, you have to speak English. So the notion that speaking English wouldn't be a part of our immigration systems would be actually very ahistorical. Secondly, I don't want to get off into a whole thing about history here, but the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. It's a symbol of American liberty lighting the world. The poem that you're referring to was added later.
While it may feel like we haven't seen Stephen Miller in a while, he is still a senior policy advisor and speechwriter in the Trump administration. Miller was with the president when he went to Nashville earlier this week. And as McKay Coppins writes in The Atlantic, he may still have his White House job because of his role as the president's, quote, right-hand troll. McKay is a staff writer for The Atlantic. He joins me now from Washington. All right, pretty provocative title there, McKay. What do you mean by right-hand troll?
Well, you know, Stephen Miller spends a lot of time behind the scenes, but he is intricately involved in shaping the president's message, writing the president's speeches, and in advising and kind of planning a lot of the big policy rollouts in this White House. And what is clear from my reporting, both spending time talking to him and talking to people who have known him throughout his life, is that he has always kind of calibrated his arguments to agitate rather than persuade. Everything he does in this White House seems designed to kind of elicit a strong and often hostile reaction from the president's opponents, and that's kind of been one of the dynamics that has defined this presidency.
And you write that Stephen Miller's trolling tendencies go back to his time in college and even high school. Did he say how that started?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, he grew up in a kind of liberal bubble of affluence in Santa Monica, California, and from a very young age, he told me he's had what he calls a nonconformist streak, which manifested itself in his kind of teenage years and beyond in kind of this high school trolling. He, for example, ran for student government in high school on a platform of making the janitors pick up trash after the students, and he was booed off stage, and there's video that we linked to from the piece where he's booed off the stage, but as he's being removed from stage, he's kind of smirking and looking pleased with himself. And I think that episode kind of sums up his general approach to needling liberals and the left.
Well, and he is only 32 years old, but how did he go from being that sort of a prankster almost to a policymaker?
Yeah, well, so, his junior year of college at Duke, he became a kind of fixture on cable news as one of the few Duke students who was willing to defend the lacrosse players who were accused at the time of rape. Now, that case ended up unraveling and the players were exonerated, and Miller kind of was left looking vindicated. And from there, he went to Capitol Hill. He became a kind of outspoken gadfly, especially on the issue of immigration. He worked for Jeff Sessions when he was an Alabama senator. And when Trump launched his campaign, everyone who knew him at the time, knew Stephen Miller at the time, told me that there was little question that he would end up on this campaign because from, immigration to nationalism to, frankly, the way that Trump kind of provokes and performs, it was clear that Trump kind of embodied all the things that kind of define Stephen Miller's worldview.
Well, does it seem like he is creating a kind of pathway for other quote-unquote trolls to enter mainstream politics?
Yeah, well, that's one of the interesting things that I tried to explore with this piece, which is that there's already kind of this generation of up-and-coming conservative activists, and you see a lot of them on college campuses kind of railing about, free speech and inviting extremely controversial speakers to campus in an effort to kind of troll the liberals on campus. And those people, the kind of the question I ask in this piece is, what happens when those sort of, campus conservative provocateurs grow up and get really influential and powerful jobs? I think Stephen Miller is an early kind of answer to that question. This is a guy who is only 32, but he wields immense power in policy making and writing speeches for the president, and those same kind of trolling tendencies are now manifesting themselves on the national political stage.
And in fact, Miller is known for helping to craft the first travel ban with the president's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon. Did Miller tell you why immigration specifically is his signature issue?
He didn't get, he was a little evasive on the issue of immigration, possibly because he knows that it's extremely controversial, and I'm guessing that he didn't want to get out ahead of the president. But one thing he did tell me, which I thought was interesting, is he said that he believes even though he was raised in a liberal household, he's always had a conservative personality. And an example of that quote-unquote conservative personality he used was he pointed to his deeply embedded attitudes toward criminals. He said that he's always had a visceral, emotional dislike and loathing of people who break the law, and he translates that to his approach to immigration. Now, of course, his critics would point out that the fact that he seems to very myopically and narrowly focus on a certain subset of lawbreakers, but that clearly, this issue has for a very long time kind of defined his politics and his worldview.
I think it's fair to say there has been a bit of a revolving door when it comes to West Wing personnel. So when it comes to Stephen Miller,
yes.
To what would you attribute his relative longevity within the administration?
I love that the relative longevity is a year and a half.
I had to say
in the White
relative.
House, but yes, no, you're right. I asked this question to a lot of people around him in the White House, and the answer I got, which does actually strike me as true, is that unlike people like Steve Bannon, who kind of flamed out of the administration early, Stephen Miller is content to be a staffer instead of a star. He does most of his work behind the scenes. He doesn't court publicity or kind of think of himself as the principal or protagonist in his narratives. He's able to advance his agenda and do his thing, by whispering in the president's ear. And I think that this president in particular, appreciates that and is not threatened also by the fact that Stephen Miller is, 32 years old. He's a young guy. He would never be considered a peer of the president's, and I think Trump appreciates that, and that's clearly one of the ways to kind of survive in this White House is to ingratiate yourself with the president and never cross him, and Stephen Miller is nothing if not extremely loyal to President Trump.
Well, it's a fascinating piece, a fascinating portrait of a really interesting member of the Trump administration. McKay Coppins in Washington for us. McKay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.